And we are very lucky to have back with us live in the studios this morning Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers. Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers are both organizers at popularresistance.org, co-directors at It's Our Economy, and co-hosts at Clearing the Fog radio show. In addition to that, Margaret Flowers is a Maryland pediatrician. She left the practice in 2007 to advocate full-time for a single-payer healthcare system at both the state and national levels. She was co-founder of the Mobilization for Healthcare Reform, and she is currently a spokesperson for Physicians for National Health Plan and is an advisor to the board and is published regularly in Truth Out, Alternate, and Al Jazeera English. In addition to Kevin's previously listed current affairs, he is also an attorney who has been a political activist since graduating from George Washington Law School in 1980. He serves on the steering committee of the Chelsea Manning Support Network and October2011.org, which organized the occupation of Washington, D.C. on Freedom Plaza and seeks to end corporatism and militarism. And he also serves as president of Common Sense for Drug Policy. And he is a co-founder of the Drug Policy Foundation, now known as Drug Policy Alliance. Kevin and Margaret were both on the show back in March, and thank you both for coming in again early this morning on Sunday.
I'm glad you saved those bios.
Thank you for having us.
I wish I had. I wish I'd known better. So tell us, start out, what brings you back to Seattle?
We're very excited to be here for the Backbone campaign, Localize This Action Camp. I think this is the 7th year of the camp. It's each summer on Vashon Island. It's about a week long, and it's an artful activism camp that teaches a wide variety of skills, talking about strategy, movement building, how to do creative actions and artwork, as well as this year we were focused on doing some kayaktivism in, relation to the Shell No campaign. Very
now
exciting.
become an international trend, kayaktivism.
Yeah.
And Seattle definitely helped to put it on the map, as did Portland, and so it's good. We actually finished last night at Vashon. It's still going on today at about 10 o'clock last night, just before the ferry at 9:55, actually, talking about the state of the movement, which was a pretty fun discussion. So, and then there's an event happening out of that conference tomorrow.
So Monday morning at 11 a.m. at Westlake Park, we'll be doing an action focused on really on white privilege and racism as the elephant in the room. It will be a creative and hopefully moving action to help people who are white maybe to start to raise awareness of how white privilege plays out and how racism is connected to so many of the issues that we care about.
To face up to white privilege, and also that racism is still a problem, and also to face up what we can do as individuals internally and externally to deal with the situation. It kind of comes out of the Sanders moment.
Right, which happened just over a week ago.
That's right.
At the very same park, Westlake Park.
Exactly. What a coincidence. We didn't plan to pick that park for that reason, of course.
So that's interesting that there is discussion now focused on that. Maybe you obviously you weren't at Westlake, nor was I at that time, but it is an issue that's been getting a lot of attention. So wondering if you wanted to share any thoughts on that.
Well, congratulations to the protesters for getting so much attention. I mean, I guess that there's a lot of criticism of course, stepping in front of the spotlight that somebody else has created, but that is a very time-honored tactic for activists to step in and stand up in front of the spotlight. And I think it was courageous that they would do that in front of a Bernie Sanders group of people who would be obviously offended that Sanders was interrupted. And so that was a pretty risky and brave thing to do. They did get a lot of discussion going, and Sanders has consistently improved his rhetoric as he's been protested from Netroots to Seattle. He's gotten better and better on those issues. He's made them a higher priority. When he went to Portland, he had big crowds in Portland, but before that, he met with Black Lives Matter organizers in Portland in a closed, in a meeting type situation to listen to their views, how he can represent their views better. He has a long record of civil rights, and so he might be a good spokesperson. And there's been mixed reaction, and I think that some of the white supporters of Sanders need to step back a little bit and reevaluate their situation, their position on it, and start to think about why those issues were being raised and why they had to be raised in that kind of moment, because they're not getting the attention they want. They can't. It's hard when you're in but still pretty much a minority perspective, not meaning black minority, but minority population. We still don't have enough people who recognize the need to deal with race. Some think that now we have a black president, it's over. But still are very serious problems of racism in this country. And a lot of people don't want to face that. So they had to get up there and get their statement out. It's a risky approach they took. Generally when you're doing a protest, the idea is to build your movement. You want to, while Sanders is your target and you want him to react, you also are talking to the public. You want the public to, come to you, not be repelled by you. So it was a risky tactic. I think there are people who are thinking about their reaction and reconsidering it, and so they seem to be having a pretty positive effect.
Yeah, I think that, talking about the risk, you basically are putting racism right in the face of I'm assuming that it was an majority white population that was at this event, and so that's a difficult thing for people to confront. And then you're also criticizing, their revered presidential candidate. So I'm sure that this was a hard thing for some people in the audience to kind of accept and understand, and there was a lot of criticism of that as a tactic. But it was, a very effective tactic. We saw widespread, national coverage of this event. And I remember you said this is a time-honored tactic. When we were doing the single-payer fight back in 2009, 2010 during the health reform process, and there was a blackout on the media for this, and we were fighting really hard to get attention for it. And we frequently had to go to where the cameras were rolling in order to get any coverage or get our message out at all. And so I think about, when I was thinking about this afterwards, as a white mother in this country, and someone who's also trying to learn about how white privilege plays out in my daily life and how I contribute to it and understand more deeply how racism works in this country. I think about the other mothers of color, and the fact that, we've already had hundreds of black men and women in this country this year be killed by police. And I remember back when the Iraq War started, and we were counting the numbers of soldiers that died, and we were holding, major vigils when the 1,000th soldier was killed or the 2,000th soldier was killed. And I'm not seeing that kind of reaction to this own war that's literally happening right in front of our eyes in our own country. And so I can understand kind of the necessity of having to do what you need to do to raise awareness for this real crisis that's happening in front of our eyes. So hats off to them for their bravery, and I hope it does continue to evolve discussion among people.
Can I make one more point about the Sanders supporters? I think it's really important to hold presidential candidates accountable on issue and on issues where they are not as strong as they should be. And Sanders was pretty quiet on Black Lives Matter before he was protested. So I can certainly support them standing up and urging him to speak to their issue. His is an issue campaign. The primary set up by the Democratic Party is designed to prevent him from winning. It's got several mechanisms in it to prevent any kind of insurgent from winning. And the superdelegates are 20%. The debates, when they had debates in 2008, there were 28. This year there are 6. And so they're preventing, free media attention for the non-money candidate. And then they have 23 primaries or caucuses in March. When McGovern won, who was the last insurgent to win, when McGovern won, he had about 5 primaries a month. So it was manageable. 23 in a month means you got to have $100 to $200 million of TV advertising just for that 1 month, and that's designed to prevent it. So he's not going to win, most likely. It's a rigged game. He can run a great campaign, win big, and he's starting out 20% deficit of superdelegates, so he's not going to win. And so it's an issue campaign, and so I think people who are concerned about where he's weak need to push him. And I'd love to see more protests. I'd like to see the immigrant groups protesting on immigration. I'd like to see anti-war groups protesting him on war. I'd like to see Palestinian rights groups, pushing him on Israel and on Zionism. He's weak in those areas. And if anyone, I'm sure a lot of Democrats who supported Obama recognize that remaining silent when Obama was running and when he was president was a mistake. Obama did a lot of things that were wrong. And if there had been a movement pushing him, that would have made him a better candidate and a better president. And we're seeing so far Sanders is getting to be a better candidate because of Black Lives Matter protests. I don't think they have to continue. I don't think it should be ongoing. If he's sitting down and listening to them, changing his rhetoric, taking their issues into account, they should start to build a bridge with him and focus on Hillary Clinton, who has her record's not great on criminal justice, and her husband's record's terrible. They brought 100,000 police to the streets. They increased the prison population dramatically. I mean, so there's reason to protest Hillary. And Martin O'Malley is our former Baltimore mayor is horrible. I mean, he really deserves to be protested by Black Lives Matter for his record, because his record is one of arresting tens of thousands of people, especially young black people, and holding them with no charges. He arrested literally 60,000 young black people and held them overnight in jail with no charges, no reason for the arrest, no suspicion, not even a reason. Don't even talk about suspicion or probable cause. Not a reason. They were just on the street doing normal things. You round them up, arrest them, hold them overnight, and the next morning they'll release without any charges, and signing a waiver saying, "I waive my right to sue for false arrest." Luckily, the NAACP and ACLU sued. The O'Malley and the city agreed to an $850,000 settlement and promised not to do it again. But the kind of policing, the probable causeless policing of the African American community and the harassment of young black people is what caused the Freddie Gray death. It's that police culture, and O'Malley is the source of it. And so that he deserves to be protested, and I don't think anyone should support O'Malley for president. If he'll do that with the Baltimore police force, what would he do as commander-in-chief? He can't be trusted. And of course the Republicans are all terrible, but they're irrelevant because blacks don't vote for them. So you can protest them, but it's not going to really have much impact because they'll turn around, the candidate will turn around and go after Black Lives Matter and get support from their white voters. So I'm not sure that's an effective tactic there. But on the Democratic side, I think Hillary and Jim Webb too. He was big on the Confederate flag issue. He came up the wrong way on that. He was disappointed that we were fighting about the Confederate flag. So Jim Webb, Martin O'Malley, Hillary Clinton all deserve protests. Sanders at least is listening, but he should be protesting on some other issues as well.
So multiple opinions out there that the Black Lives Matter event that happened on Saturday in the Netroots weakened Sanders. Do you believe that?
It depends how Sanders reacts. It's up to Sanders. I think Sanders can use this and I think he's doing a better job than some of his followers are. Some of his followers are still cursing out Black Lives Matter. I'm not going to support Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is terrible. I think that's a childish and immature reaction. They need to reevaluate that. They're doing damage to their candidate when they do that. I saw a discussion on Popular Resistance last night about this issue between people commenting on some of our articles, and an African-American woman said, I was going to support Sanders, but the reaction of his supporters really turns me off. So I think they better rethink their approach. But Sanders, so far, I think is reacting pretty well. I think he's listening. He immediately changed his rhetoric, incorporated Black Lives Matter issues into his stump speech. He's put out a pretty good racism plan. His drug war stuff could be improved. I worked in the drug war for years. And shout out to my friends at HempFest, by the way. I wish I was able to join them. I used to speak at that before marijuana was legal. I used to speak at that event. It's a great event. The volunteers who organize it do a fantastic job. It's amazing. It's a 3-day thing. Go down and join it today. I hope people can do that. But so he's put out a good plan. He's hired African American people, including a spokesperson who comes from the African American rights movement. So I think he's listening. He's having private meetings. He's listening. I think he's doing the right thing, and he deserves credit for that. I hope that a relationship can build between Black Lives Matter and Sanders, and he'll be a stronger candidate if it does, as long as his supporters start to back up a little bit and recognize he needs some improvement in this area.
Yeah, Margaret, you reminded me of it was very powerful when people were keeping track of those who were being killed in the Iraq War. And I can remember one of the moving things was actually reading names at events. Mm-hmm. In fact, that was such a popular or powerful thing that even like the Lehrer NewsHour incorporated that at the end of their show. They would list the names of those who had been Americans, right, who had been killed in the war. And yet there's none of that. You don't see any of that outside of the Black Lives Matter movement currently.
That's right, yeah.
Well, it's interesting. We went back to look at an old Occupy movie by Dennis Traynor Jr. Called American Autumn, and one of the scenes is of what would be called a Black Lives Matter protest today. This is way before Black Lives Matter, right, but it had the listing
of 2011.
Had the people have been killed, black people who've been killed by police. And there was a New York protest. We did one in D.C. as well, but New York protest, essentially a Black Lives Matter protest before Black Lives Matter existed. So we were glad to see that, and I was good to be reminded of it.
So, what do you see as in terms of energy, the dynamics between electoral politics and movement politics? Do you see electoral politics as sucking the energy out of movement politics?
Well, it definitely traditionally has sucked the energy out of movement politics, because people get onto this kind of every 2 year cycle, and they get distracted from the issues that they're working on and start to focus on races as if all we need to do is elect the right person and then things will be solved. And so traditionally we've actually put very little time and resources into electoral politics, and have actually told our activists, if you have to think about where you're going to put your energy, then movement building right now is the most important thing to be doing. But at some point, we have to start bridging that and find a way to have the movement's platform and issues inserted into the political sphere, into the electoral sphere. And so it's really exciting to see the way that Shama Sawant here in Seattle has really been a model of how you bridge movement work and electoral work and really use it to as a tool to create effective change.
And I remember that being a big question for a lot of people who supported her or were considering supporting her, whether that focus on the movement would derail any effectiveness at the city council level, but it appears to have evaporated.
Well, I think it's enhanced it instead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think the key for Sawant is really what we need nationally. The way that you have an independent movement in Seattle that stands for lots of different issues. You have good protests on a variety of topics. Thank you, Shall No protesters. That was a great one. And then you have an independent political arm that represents and is answerable to the movement. And that's what Sawant is doing. She's not part of the Democratic Party. She's independent of the Democratic Party. She's building an independent alternative, and that answers to the movement. We don't have that right now in the national level. They've done a great job of shutting out third parties. The media does an absolutely terrible job. They treat it as if Jill Stein doesn't exist, even though if you put out Jill Stein's positions, they'd be better than Bernie Sanders. And so people heard about it and saw what she was doing. She's going to movement events all the time to try to show that she's representing the movement, listening to the movement, part of the movement. And if people saw it, they'd probably be supporting her at a much higher level. But because the media doesn't cover it, it doesn't happen. So we really have in the United States at most levels of government, Sawant's an exception, kind of a mirage democracy with rigged elections where we're forced to vote for two corporate candidates, and that will be the same this time in the presidential race. We'll have two some insane Republican looking at their choices right now. They're not very good. And then on the Democratic side, Bernie's bad on some issues, but he's unlucky to get the nomination. And so then we got Hillary Clinton, and if she starts to falter, Joe Biden's ready. Al Gore's talking about being ready. So all the corporate Democrats are lining up to fill in if play the Hubert Humphrey role if Hillary can't make it. So we're going to have two crummy choices, and the third choice that's actually with the views of most people in Seattle won't be heard about, and most people in Seattle will vote against their interests and follow Bernie Sanders' advice and vote for Hillary. So that'll be sad.
Yeah, I think there's a really important concept that for people to understand, and a lot of people do understand this, and the way that we kind of look at the political situation in the country right now, in addition to the fact that it's a mirage democracy, is the underlying reason why our government is not functioning for the majority of people is because it's a plutocracy. It's ruled by the wealthy. It's controlled by wealth and by large corporations who are literally writing our laws. And so you have these two parties, the Republican and the Democratic parties, which are both very much corporate parties. The Democratic Party has moved in that direction now for a number of years to be very much a pro-business
since they were plantation owners.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But then this whole new Democrats and third way Democrats and all that are really just very kind of pro-corporate and aligned with Wall Street. And so you can't change the problem within the parties that are part of that problem. And so to really start to have that voice of the movement, we need to build an electoral alternative, that political alternative that's independent of them and that is more solid on the issues. And that's why I think it's really fundamental that we support candidates like Jill Stein, like Shama Sawant. And it was disappointing that Bernie Sanders decided to run after having a lifelong career of running outside of the Democratic Party, choosing to go into that party at this time when his stature, his notoriety, his credibility would have lent a lot to building that third political alternative. It would have made it more difficult for him to win, but he's not, as Kevin said, for many reasons he won't get through the primary season. If he had run as an independent, he would have run all the way till November and could have really pushed for inclusion in the debates and built up that strong base of support behind him. So we're sad that he didn't do that, but
we're not going. We obviously individually don't support him because of that. I mean, that decision, to me, shows that he fails to recognize the real problem in this country. The real problem in this country is a corporate duopoly creating a plutocracy, and he's enhancing one of those arms of the corporate duopoly, the Democratic Party, a Wall Street-funded party, big business party, involved in many wars, supporting Israel, doing a lot of things wrong, and he's supporting that party by running. He calls for a revolution against the billionaires, but he's in a billionaire party, and so it's just rhetoric. I mean, his solutions are right on many domestic issues, but everybody knows those solutions. It's not a surprise he's right. The public supports those by 2/3, but those 2/3 are not going to get what they want because we live in a rigged democracy. And so by going in the Democratic Party, saying he's going to support whoever gets the nomination, he's going to urge his followers to support whoever's in the Democratic nominee, shows to me he doesn't get it. The fundamental power structure is the problem, and he's not challenging it. He's keeping people in the Democratic Party when they should be fleeing it. And that's the fundamental flaw of the Sanders campaign and why we can't support him.
So why at this point aren't third parties like the Green Party doing better than they are? I mean, this has been happening since I've been conscious of politics and stuff, which hasn't been that long. I can claim maybe 30 years of my life for that.
That's pretty long.
It's been the same system, and we see the solution 30 years ago, and nothing has changed.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm sure your listeners are aware of all the barriers to third parties in this country and the lack of media attention, being excluded from the debates. It's difficult to get resources running as a third party candidate. Never really match the kind of money that Democrats and Republicans get from their kind of political machine. So it's a struggle. I think in terms of Jill Stein's campaign, just looking at the difference between 2012 and her run now, she is ahead of the game. She's more organized. She's been continuing to build her base throughout the 4 years between these elections, or 3 years. And she's getting more media attention. And I see many positive signs that her campaign is growing. But I think, in terms of recent history, there was a real fundamental mistake that the progressive movement made in 2004 when and you could probably speak to this better, when Ralph Nader won, or not won, but when he ran in 2000, and there was the perception that he was the one that threw that election to Bush, right? And you look at the facts, and that's not actually true. But, people were so mad at him, and you're a spoiler, and it's because of you that we got Bush. And so it showed that he actually had power. If he did in fact spoil that election, then he had power to affect the electoral outcome. And that's that instead of embracing that power, so many people then ran away from it, and got afraid of the lesser evil, the more greater evil. And so I think that was a fundamental mistake that set us back. And I think you should probably speak to that.
I was Ralph Nader.
You were there.
I was Ralph Nader's spokesperson in 2004. I was his press secretary. So I didn't make that choice. But then I spoke at Hempfest when it was illegal to smoke pot. So I tend to go toward, where the injustice is. But that was a fundamental flaw. If you look at the history of how transformation happens in this country, it doesn't come from duopoly candidates. We've had this big business problem throughout U.S. history. The so-called founding fathers were the greatest oligarchs of their era, the largest slave owners, plantation owners. They were the biggest lawyers and business people. They were the oligarchs, and they wrote a constitution that focuses on property rights to protect their property, i.e. their slaves, and human rights was secondary. And so we have that as our foundation of the country, which really is a flawed beginning. And I know the Constitution is revered and blah, 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 but I think we had to be honest about it. It's a property owner, slave owner Constitution. and so it needs a lot of work still. And it's been gradually making work. They created a constitution where 6% of the population voted. Now we have almost universal access for, although we could do a lot better on details like allowing universal registration. As soon as you're 18, you should be allowed to vote. You should have to go through a registration process even. So there's lots to improve. But throughout that time period, movements have made changes, and they've done it not by winning presidential elections. They've often had presidential candidates, but they usually lost. And if you look at women's rights, women voting rights, women had to create a third party to challenge primarily the Democrats, that was their target, and convince them to support women's rights. And they did that in the electoral arena with a political party, as well as with a movement separate from that. You saw it with union rights, you saw it with the 8-hour workday, ending child labor. The whole New Deal comes out of the socialist and progressive political campaigns, and continue to make pressure on FDR because there were always the threats of socialists and progressives running against him as a third party. That is a critical power we have. We don't have to win to win our issue. We don't have to win the election to win our issue. So I think people misunderstand. They go into this horse race mentality that the media puts forward, who's winning the polls, blah, blah, blah. It's really what issues are going to advance? How are we going to change things? And we can change things by staying for what we believe in. You're not going to change things by voting for what you don't want.
By holding your nose and voting.
It's better to vote for what you want and lose than it is to vote for, as Eugene Debs said, than to vote for what you don't want and win. And we often get everyone voting for what they don't want and winning the election and losing what they want. So I think that's a fundamental mistake of U.S. voters and a misunderstanding of the history of the movement. Now, the other side, the two corporate duopolies recognize this. So they've created a series of barriers. When I was Nader's spokesperson, we were doing ballot access up until the last month of the election almost, and Nader was sued by the anti-Democratic Party. I mean, the Democratic Party, by the anti-Democratic Party, 20 states, and the litigation went beyond the election. They even attached his account in Pennsylvania, his
bank account,
his personal bank account, trying to get $50,000 out of him in fines for falsely charged, ballot access fraud, which was actually, it's a very complicated story, but basically the Democrats hired people to give them fake signatures and then sued him for producing fake signatures. They also sued him for not paying the people who gave the fake signatures. The Nader campaign would try to check to see if he was a legitimate signature, and if they would give him fake signatures, they wouldn't give him the person the money, and then Democrat lawyers sued Nader for not paying the workers, and then they sued him for the false signatures and attached his bank account $50,000. Just like last month, finally, a Pennsylvania court ruled that what was going on with third parties in Pennsylvania was violating the Constitution. But that, it's years later after Nader had that hassle. So there's all sorts of challenges. They don't want democracy in this country. Neither party does. The Republicans are more obvious about it because they're going after, reducing the rights of African Americans and elderly to vote with all these registration procedures and clean the registration list and all that stuff. But the Democrats don't want to change the voting population either. They don't want the poor and working class voting. They want what they got. They want the people who know are going to vote for them. And if you had a wide open election, you get a Jesse Ventura. I mean, one reason why Jesse Ventura won was they had lots of debates during that campaign, and they had same-day registration. You could register the day you voted. So as the debates progressed, people got excited. They really got interested. Finally, I might as well vote for him. They could register that day and vote. That's not allowed in most of the countries. So we have all sorts of obstacles to voters, all sorts of obstacles to candidates, and the reason we do that is because the people who have the power want to keep it that way. They want a plutocracy. They don't want the people in charge.
Well, one of the movements that is also doing well energy-wise is actually the energy.
The climate movement.
Yes, the climate movement is questioning our use of fossil fuel as energy. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the situation. I know you're fighting a natural gas facility.
We don't call it natural. That's their propaganda. We call it fracked gas.
Very good.
Natural gas is the industry term for propaganda purposes. It sounds so good. You want some organic coal?
Yeah, this is a fight in Maryland. It's the first fracked gas export terminal to be built on the East Coast. And in addition to that being a problem, because we have the Marcellus and Utica shales that are being fracked, and there's a lot of potential there. There's a lot of carbon that they can get out of the ground there. This export terminal is different because it's the first time in the world that they've put one literally in a residential community. So you have this huge, where they're actually building it right now.
And these things have a tendency to explode.
Right. Where they're building it is literally across the street from homes. And next to the refinery area is where the recreation fields are for this community. So within the kind of 2-mile blast zone of this facility, it's a liquefaction plant, power plant to run the liquefaction plant, and then an export terminal. There are more than 2,000 homes, more than 8,000 people who are living there, and it's on a peninsula. So about 300 of the homes would have to drive towards the plant in order to get off the peninsula if there was a catastrophic event. And even if there's not a catastrophic event, they're going to emit more than 20 tons of pollutants a year, including cancer-causing chemicals and endocrine disruptors and neurochemicals and things like that. And they bought emissions offset credits, so that allowed them to pollute more in that community, so they could do some wind, power somewhere else out in the mountains where nobody lives.
So that pollution equivalent to about 400,000 cars a year.
Yeah, right in that community.
Right in that little community.
So there's a lot of...
And they lied about the population to get the permit.
Right. They were fraudulent on their permit to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. When that was pointed out to what's called the FERC, they denied a rehearing, so it's currently in an appeals court.
Describe the population, though, that they described.
Right. So basically, 8 miles south of the plant is Solomons, and they said there's 2,000 people living there. And then 16 miles north of the plant is Prince Frederick, and they said there's 2,000 people living there. So they said, there's only 4,000 people in this area. And they left out the 44,000 people living in between, the 8,000 in that kind of immediate blast zone. And just 3 miles away from the plant is a nuclear power plant. So, causing another level, and it's just happens to be sitting, on the edge of Washington, D.C., near a major naval base. So, I don't know, somebody might want to target that area with the 400,000 gallon tank of propane sitting right there. But so for so many reasons, it's wrong that this is happening, and there's so much corruption throughout the county as well. The way that Dominion Energy has bought off the county council, the sheriff's office, the police, the fire department. So we're fighting that, and they're behind schedule. That's good news for us. The prices of gas are falling. That's good news, and we're looking at every avenue that we have to fight this.
But that's a very strong, vibrant part of the movement is the anti-carbon movement. Keep the carbon in the ground movement. Stop the oil trains. Stop the pipelines. Stop the liquefaction plants. Stop the export. Arctic drilling. All that extreme energy extraction needs to stop. We're part of a group called Beyond Extreme Energy that's focused on the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is a commission that approves all the interstate infrastructure for oil and gas. And it's an interesting agency in that it receives no tax dollars. All of its funding comes from the oil and gas industry. And so guess what? They tend to rubber stamp every pipeline, every export terminal that they can. But there's public opposition across the country on this. It's really aggressive. It's a lot of, and it's very community-based. People who see their communities being destroyed by oil and gas infrastructure are standing up and saying no. And the industry's noticing it. It's they're seeing, and the Northwest is one of the strongest areas, by the way.
Congratulations.
Out here, we have an article going up on popular resistance today that focuses on the Northwest and how it has stopped a large number of pipeline infrastructure activities. And of course, the Shell No protests became worldwide, especially after Portland, but also in Seattle, became worldwide known as a great action. So there's awareness and there's activity, and I think in the end we're going to win. But it's a big fight. You're fighting against the biggest energy interests there are, and they all recognize the future. They're not these people are not fools. They know that their time is limited, and that they have to work fast to get infrastructure in place, get as much out as they can, make as much money as they can before they're stopped, because they know they're going to be stopped. In the end, they're going to lose. The question is when and how quickly we can do it, and so that's what the fight is.
Yeah, again, amazing movement that is bringing in a lot of people that hadn't previously been involved.
Exactly.
In things like this.
That's what's so interesting about it. Like in Cove Point, that's a conservative Republican military community. They don't do protests. And so when we got
they
involved,
do now.
and we've seen that in Texas, and rural Texas areas. We see it in Pennsylvania and farming Republican voting areas. People standing up against fracking. So, yeah, it's very interesting. And we see it's not just. You're also getting a lot of leadership from the indigenous people. The Idle No More movement is doing fantastic work, and it's at its peak level compared to any recent history back to the 60s and the Peltier era. I mean, so it's been a while for indigenous people standing up, and they are standing up too. So it's a very interesting time, and that's just one of the fronts of struggle. I mentioned we talked about the state of the movement. At our last talk at Vashon.
But before I just want to say quickly that there has been actually a long history of indigenous resistance to these
forever.
Extraction projects on native land. It just doesn't get the attention that it does now that there's been kind of this takeoff moment.
And they've also grown. They've gotten more active.
Yeah.
I mean, there always been resistance has been kind of had to be the indigenous way throughout our history because it was an ethnic cleansing, right from George Washington. You read his orders about how to deal with Indian tribes, and you'd call him a war criminal. Literally. I mean, he talked about killing the seniors, killing the women, enslaving as many as possible, destroying their homes, destroying their food. That's war criminal stuff.
But you were going to say the state of the movement.
Well, I was going to say that this is, that's what's exciting about now, and it doesn't get the attention it deserves. But we talked about the Black Lives Matter. We've talked about the extreme extraction. But there are 15 fronts of struggle. Look at the $15 wage, the whole labor issue. Another peak activity where we're having some victories, and you've seen them in Seattle as well. We're seeing on housing, and tenants' rights are starting to stand up. We're seeing it on the whole banking and big finance battles that are happening. We're seeing on the trade agreements, largest coalitions ever against corporate trade. So movements are growing and getting bigger and more vibrant, and they don't get covered in the media. That's why we have popular resistance. That's our job, is to cover. If you want to know what's going on in the movement, get our daily summary, because you'll just every morning wake up and say, thank goodness people are doing something. Because there's a vibrant movement out there, and it needs more attention, needs more people getting involved.
Last time you were in the studios, we talked about the TPP, and there's been developments with that. I wonder if you can touch on that.
Sure. So the last time that we were here in April, we were really deeply involved in fighting what's called fast track. It's legislation that Congress passed, or at that point was in the process of passing, to give the president the authority to sign agreements like these international treaties that are being negotiated, the TPP, and then there's also the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership and the Trade and Services Agreement that are in the works. So we were fighting to stop Congress from giving him that ability, because it really turns into a process which has been used before for NAFTA and the World Trade Organization, of rushing these agreements through Congress with very little review and no amendments and just an up or down vote. So we were able to delay Congress from giving the president fast track for, really, they tried over a number of years, and this movement of movements stopped that. But as it became really critical that actually the negotiations around the Trans-Pacific Partnership had stalled until he was given fast track, it was really interesting to watch the whole process of how President Obama and the leadership in the House and Senate worked together to just get exactly the number of votes that they needed in the House and Senate to pass this. So that passed, and
it was a very choreographed corruption.
Yeah, definitely.
You needed 60 votes in the Senate, and your two senators both deserve to be thrown out of office for their votes. They are obviously not representing the people's interests. So you had the city council unanimously oppose fast track, and you had both senators support it. They were critical votes. You had a Boeing executive in an office on the floor of the Senate. Right off the floor of the Senate, the Boeing CEO was there to make sure that your two senators did the wrong thing. So that was a really sad, and I really do think they should both thrown out of office. So I hope that people organize to do that, give them a serious challenge, both in the primary and in the general election. They should be challenged by a third party. But it was 60 votes in the Senate, 218 votes in the House, exact numbers, no more. The 219th vote didn't have to take any political risk. The 220th vote didn't have to take any political risk. They know this is an unpopular position. They twisted enough arms to get the exact number of votes they needed, and that was where it ended. Margaret said that TPP's talks have stalled up to because of the lack of fast track. Now we're seeing that he has fast track, and they're still stalled.
Which is good news.
And the reason they're stalled is because in every country where these agreements are being negotiated, there are three big agreements. The worst one is the Trade and Services Agreement, which no one hears about. That's the biggest one and the most dangerous one. The other one is with Europe, and the other one with the Asia Pacific. But in every one of the countries where these are being negotiated, there's opposition and strong opposition. Just 2 days ago, was it yesterday?
Well, it was Saturday in New Zealand, but Friday here.
That's right. They live in the future. So in New Zealand, they're a day ahead of us. But they had 21 cities protesting the TPP in New Zealand. There's talk about New Zealand dropping out. New Zealand was actually one of the 4 countries that started the TPP. It grew when the United States joined. It got to be a bigger agreement. But there were 4 countries initially that started it. And the U.S. Embassy put out a notice to Americans in New Zealand to stay away from the protests because they could get dangerous in New Zealand this couple days ago. So they were afraid of them. And they were protesting in Australia.
The children with their flags and signs, they were very dangerous.
It was a very family-friendly protest, but anyway. And there were, Australia's had protests, Japan's had protests. There are protests in every one of these countries. That limits the ability of the elected officials who support this, their ability to negotiate. Obama is pushing for 12 years a patent for biologic-based pharmaceuticals. Australia is saying the most we can do is 5, and the most they can do is 5 because politically they can't get away with it anymore. They would do more, but for the pharmaceutical friends, but because of that, the reality of the politics of Australia, they can't. So that's a big gap. You're seeing that kind of thing with dairy in Canada. You're seeing also on every country there are issues where the government can't go as far as they need to go to make an agreement with the United States. And the sad thing, by the way, is we've had several leaks that show the United States compared to the other countries. Every leak about where the countries stand on issues shows the U.S. is the most corporate. They are pushing the most corporate agenda, the most aggressively corporate agenda, even from countries that have strong corporate power like Australia, New Zealand, Japan. A lot of corporate power in those countries. They don't go anywhere near where the U.S. wants them to go. And that's what's really making it very hard for this agreement to come forward. Is the greed of the U.S. corporations is so intense that they really want it all. They're not going to negotiate. They don't want to negotiate for less than they can get.
But just as we saw in the fast track fight, it was really interesting how the Congress had to maneuver because initially in the House they lost the vote, and it should have been a dead issue at that point.
We should have won.
Right. But then what they did was they took the weekend to really, figure this out and finagle something, and they came back invented a whole nother procedure so that they could pass it through the House and finalize it. And so just as that happened, we're seeing around the Trans-Pacific Partnership all this finagling about how they can kind of get around what's going on and figure out how to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So even though that there's a lot of struggling in the negotiations, there are a lot of countries who are rising up, and those relationships are very fragile, and major economies may drop out. That would be wonderful. We haven't won this fight yet, and we have to continue to organize. And so it was really exciting to us after the fast track fight to see the people that we've been working with around the country not at all dejected by it. They were very much like, well, this is what we need to do now. It's, really clear. We saw
escalate
that what we were doing wasn't enough. And so we've developed an escalation plan. We just finalized our call to action. And we're really inviting people who want to get involved, come to flushthetpp.org, and you can get information. You can join our national calls, our national organizing, and we're going to step things up and do what we can to stop this.
We see it as a really cultural moment opportunity. The key to the success of these movements right now is that they put an issue on the agenda in a new way. Black Lives Matter reframed the whole issues around racism and police violence. They were able, put out Black Lives Matter as a really key phrase for people to get that there still is racism. Occupy was able to put on the agenda, the unfair economy, the disparity of wealth and income, the corruption of the economy by big business and Wall Street. And so they reframed the agenda, and that's the victory. We have an opportunity with the TPP fight to focus on 2 really key issues. One issue is democracy versus corporatocracy. This is really a corporate power grab, and so we can really emphasize that issue, create a cultural moment around that. The other issue is public good versus privatization and commodification. That is like the fight really about where we go as an economy. Is it going to be a public economy like a healthcare for the public good or a healthcare for profit? We're going to have a postal service that's the public good, or we're going to have a privatized postal service, which is what Trade and Services Agreement would do. Would push toward a privatized postal service. We can have a privatized postal service for profit or deliver mail for the public good. And so that's a really key fight. So if anyone's out there, I have 2 requests from the people of Seattle. anyone out there come with a hashtag, a Black Lives Matter or a Occupy Wall Street hashtag that gets those 2 points or one of those 2 points across, let us know. We're looking for a good marketing idea from the people of Seattle. The second request is to create a cultural moment like the Battle of Seattle in 1999 that stopped the WTO in its tracks. We need to do something like that in D.C. in the next 4 or 5 months. Any thoughts from people involved in how that was structured, how that developed? It doesn't have to be exactly this is a whole nother generation now, 16 years later, so it's not the same model, but the goal is a cultural moment like 1999 in Seattle, like Occupy, like Black Lives Matter, with the TPP as a chance to really face up to this issue of commodification of everything against the public good. And so that's a real big issue.
And it seems that synchronizing things in individual cities has worked well in the past.
That's one that will be definitely part of it. We plan to help organize synchronized actions in cities in cooperation with our international allies, both in Europe and Asia, because there are various events in Europe and Asia that we're going to also do synchronized actions in cities. We'd also like to do something to really shut down Washington, D.C. And it doesn't take 100,000 people to shut down Washington, D.C. It just takes 20,000 brave people.
That's all we need.
That's all we need. So come to Washington when we call you. No, we got more than that. Come to Washington when we call you. There's an opportunity to really do a cultural moment that really shifts the direction of the country in an important way.
Yeah,
it's
fundamental. Really, to
beyond
everything.
just the TPP.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons that we're fighting the Trans-Pacific Partnership is that if there's an issue that a person cares about in this country, like having safe food, clean water, clean air, healthcare in the future, jobs and living wages in the future,
energy extraction.
If the Trans-Pacific Partnership and these other agreements go through, it will really set back our work for decades and make it almost impossible to reverse this privatization that they're really going to be pushing. So this is a fundamental issue for us, and it's something that we can win on. We can create the political culture that makes it impossible for the TPP to go through, but it just takes us rising up together to do that.
Kevin, you are on the Chelsea Manning support network, and there's been recent developments with Chelsea Manning's situation. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's crazy. Boy, I've been on a steering committee for Chelsea Manning for, 4 years or something now. And, her case is basically one of a whistleblower telling the truth about war crimes, and the whistleblower gets punished and not the people who commit the war crimes. So she got a terrible sentence after an unfair trial. She was put in solitary before the trial for a very long time. We took a lot of protests just to get her treated fairly as a pretrial detainee. And she's been doing really well in prison. She's fought very well for hormonal therapy and faced up the issue of the trans issues that I think deserve attention too. So she really is a hero on that as well. And now, recently, in the last couple of weeks, they've been threatening her with solitary confinement, indefinite solitary confinement, over publications that she's received. A magazine with Caitlyn Jenner on the cover, and toothpaste that's expired. That kind of stuff. There's like 4 or 5 publications they didn't like, and so that she's being threatened with indefinite solitary confinement. We have an article about it on Popular Resistance, or you can go to the Chelsea Manning Support Network website and send an email to the prison authorities. They're going to have a behind closed doors secret hearing on this the next few days. I just got word yesterday that they've now not allowed Chelsea to go to the law library to prepare for that, and so she's been cut out of the law library, and so they are really taking this nonsense seriously. Maybe it's just another excuse to harass someone who's a whistleblower hero against war, but they are taking it seriously, and it makes a difference when people stand up and show they support her. It makes a difference, and so I really urge people to go to the Chelsea Manning Support Network website or Popular Resistance and do what you can to support her from outside the prison walls. It's a disgrace the way this country is treating her. She should not be in jail. She just like some of the other whistleblowers, Ed Snowden and others, they deserve to be actually heroes, not threatened with mass long-term incarceration or involved in long-term incarceration and threatened with a solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is one of those things in the United States that's, a true embarrassment. We have 80 to 90,000 people in solitary confinement every day in this country. We have more people in solitary confinement than most countries have in prison.
Including children.
including children. That's right, for their own good.
Right.
That's what they say.
To protect them.
But because our prisons are lousy. But it's a real disgrace, and people who understand solitary confinement, have researched it and written about it, describe it as torture, and some people don't recover from it. And there are Black Panthers from the '60s who are still in solitary confinement. I hope Black Lives Matter takes up the political prisoner issue, because that there's a lot of problems in that, the way they treated Black political activists in the past, and people need to stand up for them as well. So Chelsea exemplifies some of the worst things about this country in the way we treat whistleblowers, trans people, and the way we treat people in prison. So it's a really important issue on a lot of fronts.
All right. Well, we were discussing earlier about the difference between electoral politics and movement politics. And Margaret, I just found out a couple days ago.
It's a secret.
No, it's not a secret anymore.
Going to be running for the Senate. Is that correct?
I'm running for U.S. Senate in Maryland. That's right. Barbara Mikulski is retiring after a long career, so it's an open seat. And it's interesting because actually I think my run has roots in Seattle. When I was here in April and met Shama Sawant and spent a few days and saw really what was going on here through her position on the city council and how that had moved issues. I was really inspired by that, and I was literally here in Seattle when I got the text from someone in Maryland saying, "Would you consider running for Barbara Mikulski's Senate seat as seeking the Green nomination in Maryland?" And I had been asked before to run, and I always said no immediately because I felt like most of my time and energy needed to be put into movement building. And this time I thought, oh, well, maybe it's the right time to do this. So I spent a few months thinking about it, talking to others, and we officially filed the end of June, and we'll be launching the campaign in mid-September. And in fact, my first fundraising house party is here in Seattle tonight. So if I win, thank you to Seattle.
Who's throwing it?
There are amazing people here in Seattle, amazing activists and passionate people. Dr. David McClanahan with Western Washington Physicians for National Health Program, and Lauren Taubman and Serena Holstrom, who are also strong activists on a variety of issues.
Occupy.com is their publication.
Right, and Lauren just did a movie about net neutrality called Kill Switch. So very excited that the Seattle community is willing to do this, and excited about this kind of next phase and how we can use electoral tools to augment the movement, to raise issues, and if I win, as a tool for real change. So
it's an uphill battle.
No doubt.
It's a rigged election system. Margaret knows what she's getting into. She's joining a poker game where they got aces up their sleeves, and so she's going to have to really run a really effective campaign. And Margaret is someone who comes out of the movement for sure, and if you look at our articles that we've written on Truth Out and Alternate and stuff with Popular Resistance, while she comes out of the single payer movement, has a very broad area of knowledge on the economy, on government corruption, on housing, multiple issues, and you can see that she's written a great deal on those issues on those websites, and so she'll be a strong candidate. I know she's going to work really hard at it. Of course, what that means is I have to do more work at Popular Resistance because she won't be doing that, and so I'll be juggling more balls than I'm already juggling. So that'll be a challenge, and we welcome people joining that effort and joining her effort too, and I hope people will support it. There's a Shell website up right now that isn't. She hasn't announced it yet, so it's not really. This is the first time she's discussed it with the media, so you get to be first on that. So there's a Shell website up, and she'll probably announce it mid-September, and then you're planning a tour of the state or something, I guess.
Right. Well, of course, we'll be traveling around the state. I mean, we are already meeting regularly and planning out our strategy and getting organized. People are volunteering. I have a campaign manager and a treasurer, and just about have office space, and so it's coming together. The main thing is I see this as a necessity in terms of building that independent political arm that we talked about earlier in the show. And so how are we going to build that arm? We need to really run serious campaigns, and that's what I plan to do. I'm taking this seriously. I need to raise serious money, and I'm going to do what I can to raise that money. I'll be putting 110% into this campaign, and no matter what, I think that we're going to win, because I think we're going to build this party. We're going to inspire more people to run. We're going to raise issues that need to be raised. We're going to educate people about things that they don't know about. And I see this as, this is a marathon that we're in, and this is a next stage in kind of the work that we're doing to move us farther towards that end goal of really creating a society we want to live in. So
I'm going to do now. I used to
excited.
do Ralph Nader when I was his press secretary. What's the website?
Oh. It is flowersforsenate.org, and we do have, while the website is a shell, because we need to raise these funds to really get going, and even to get a decent website. We have a bank account and we have a donate button. So if people are interested in donating to that,
so it's flowersforsenate.org.
Flowers for Senate, F-O-R, Senate.org. And, we've spent a lot of time in the House and Senate working in a variety of ways, both meeting with members of Congress and their staff, educating them, organizing briefings. I've testified before Congress. We've also been arrested in Congress protesting when they're going the wrong way and exposing what's going on. And so I really look forward to an opportunity to, if I win, have a different role in there, and to be able to, it's such a charade in there. And there's so much that needs to be said that isn't said because it's so scripted. And so I really want to get in there and shake things up and bring in the voices of people that are being excluded and make it real for the other members of Congress in there to understand what it is that they're doing. And so in addition to running this campaign, we're putting together advisory panels, and we're going to start creating a plan. If I win, what are the things that I can do within my power as a Senate outside of passing legislation, because that's hard, and of course we'll introduce legislation, but there are a lot of other things that we can do, creating task forces, trying to hold people accountable to create change in this country. So I'm excited about learning how to use this as a tool for real change.
I think Margaret's the first U.S. Senate candidate in Maryland to run for Senate while on probation.
Oh, with a little sentence hanging over my head there. But you know what? I'll be a
It was a protest at Dominion against the Dominion Cove Point facility.
Right. And if I end up, we continue to take action, and that's not going to stop as well when necessary. And if I run for a few weeks from inside the detention center.
Mm-hmm.
Eugene Debs did it.
Exactly. I just need to put a solid team in place.
Of course, Debs was had a 10-year sentence for
Yeah.
anti-war speaking out against war, but
Right.
and on the ballot was his prison identification number, and he did pretty well.
Yeah.
He got a lot of votes.
Yeah, I'm not really looking to that as a.
You're not going to be following that model.
I'm not intending to, but.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time. We're talking with Margaret Flowers and Kevin Zeese. They're both organizers with popularresistance.org. And again, what are the key
Well, the
websites
event
and
tomorrow.
events? Oh, please.
The event tomorrow,
11 a.m. at Westlake Park, and
Right.
that's focused on white privilege and racism.
focusing on the big elephant in the room that no one talks about.
It's going to be creative
And there will be a big elephant to make that point.
right, and family friendly. So come on down to Westlake Park at 11 or during your lunchtime. The website for the fight that we're doing in Southern Maryland with the fracked gas refinery is wearecovepoint.org.
There's an Indiegogo campaign right now.
That's right. We actually only have a few months left of funds for that, so we're doing an Indiegogo campaign. Flushthetpp.org if you want to get involved in the TPP fight, and if you want to support my Senate campaign, flowersforsenate.org.
But you can also get to the TPP fight on Popular Resistance, and you can sign up for a daily news summary on popularresistance.org, which I think will make your day a great start every morning. So please sign up for Popular Resistance's daily news summary.
All right. Well, with that, we are out of time. I want to thank you both very much for coming in and spending time with us again this morning.
Thank you
Happy to
so
do it.
much,
Thanks
Mike.
for having us.
Pleasure.